The Xbox One X is out in just a few days on November 7th, and gamers will finally be able to see if the most powerful console in the world is truly all it's cracked up to be. We've had hands-on time with this new console, testing it out with a variety of games on both a 4K HDR set as well as a 1080p TV. Since the system is just around the corner, we figured we'd put together this breakdown, including some tips to help you get started. And if you're new to the world of 4K gaming, some pointers to make sure you're getting the most out of your picture. Before we dive into some things you might want to know before getting your Xbox One X next week, here's a quick overview of some of the basic stats of the machine, since we'll be referring back to those. The big draw of the system is that it outputs games at 4K resolution, and also features a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, plus 4K video streaming, as well as support for a wide color gamut and HDR10. None of that separates it too much from the cheaper Xbox One S, but under the hood things are a bit different. It features 6 teraflops of processing power and 326 gigabits per second of memory bandwidth for improved visuals in gaming. Plus, it can stream and record clips in 4K at 60 FPS. First things first, how to transfer your old stuff to the Xbox One X and get it set up, which was pretty simple from our time with the system. Thankfully, you can use the same cables with your Xbox One S, which will align in the exact same way, since the back of the X is identical to the back of the S. If for whatever reason you're choosing not to use the HDMI cable supplied with either the S or the X, just be sure that you're using one that's at least a high-speed HDMI 2.0 cable, so you can actually make use of the Ultra HD output. Otherwise, you won't get 4K or HDR. In the most recent update, Microsoft made it pretty simple to hop over to the X if you're upgrading from a previous console. In the settings menu, you'll find a backup option that will allow you to transfer your profile and games through an external hard drive or via the network. If you're using an external hard drive, make sure it's one you don't mind formatting, because that'll be required if you're transferring games and other files. When you get started with the Xbox One X, the X will simply detect it on the other end, and you can load the profile straight in from there. It's pretty simple. The first thing you'll probably want to do is calibrate your TV and set up your Xbox for HDR and 4K. In the display settings, you'll be able to enable HDR and also make changes to the color depth. This will vary depending on your TV, so be sure to look up your specific color depth to ensure you're getting the best picture. Alternatively, the Xbox One X has an option under its advanced settings that will tell you what your TV is capable of. So then you can just adjust the selections accordingly from there, and kind of does it all itself. There's also a calibration tool on the Xbox One X itself, which will give you some guidance about the contrast you need for proper HDR. But something to keep in mind with HDR if you're new to the format is it's all about super high contrast, with darker blacks and brighter whites. Don't be afraid to truly bump each of those settings to their limit as you follow the prompts. That range of contrast will really make the image pop. Now on to some of the video games themselves. Well, almost. Before you start playing, you're going to need to make sure your HDR settings on your TV are actually on. Some TVs automatically detect an HDR signal and adjust automatically, but many don't, including the TV we tested on. For some TVs, the HDR setting is on a per input basis, meaning you'll have to go into the same input that your Xbox One X is plugged into and turn it on manually from there. But that's not where the complications stop, because even then, some TVs require a manual settings adjustment based on viewing HDR or non-HDR content. While some TVs do detect that HDR content is being viewed, they won't auto-switch to the proper color and backlight settings required to really harness UHD. We'd recommend doing research into how your TV handles this, but a good rule of thumb is that if your colors look bland and muted, you're probably not watching it in HDR. The reverse applies as well. If HDR settings are on, but you're watching non-HDR content, it'll similarly look bland and washed out. Unfortunately, there's not much of a rule of thumb here, as the standard is relatively new and different manufacturers handle it differently. However, most TVs will at the very least give you a notification that HDR content is currently going, even if they don't swap automatically. Okay, cool. So now we can get into the games that are Xbox One X enhanced. That support will vary by title, and unfortunately not all games are going to be supported right at launch. While the Xbox One X has a list of over 130 games that will be Xbox One X enhanced, those updates are rolling out over time. Shadow of War, for instance, didn't have its update live when we were testing the game on the consoles. However, for the games that are updated, you could see a variety of options or no options at all. That makes perfect sense, right? But some updates do offer actual settings. You might see the option to favor resolution over frame rate, rendering a game at 4K 30 FPS, or you might see the option to render at 60 FPS and 1080p, or the option to render at 1080p with 30 FPS with greatly improved graphics. And fortunately, one big difference here that we saw from the PS4 Pro is that you don't have to manually enable HDR on every title, at least on the titles we tested. With the PS4 Pro, the system does a good job auto-detecting resolution, but enabling HDR is a more manual process. With the Xbox One X, the system seems to be swinging for the fences visually in most of its titles. But that wasn't the case with every game. Assassin's Creed Origins, for instance, offers blanket 4K resolution and HDR improvements, but nothing incredibly robust in terms of tailoring the look of the game. Gears of War 4, on the other hand, allows you to prioritize frame rate or visual fidelity. On 1080p TVs, that's going to mean super sampling, but more on that in a second. Another Microsoft title, Halo 5, offers 4K visuals, but minus HDR at the moment. If you're already keen on 4K gaming or have a PS4 Pro, our experience for a couple of third-party games we tested on the Xbox and the Pro had a lot of similarities, with the Xbox having a bit of an advantage with frame rate, but nothing that might shatter your mind, so keep those expectations in check. However, Microsoft's first-party titles really do shine on the X, especially Forza 7, which makes sense as it was sort of tooled with a console in mind. Fortunately for those of you without 4K TVs, you can expect some improvements from 1080p mode as well. The Xbox One X will use super sampling on those games, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, which refers to rendering at a high output then downscaling, making 1080p games much sharper and cleaner. In our time with Gears of War 4, there was a notable difference, especially with a cleaner frame rate. Outside of games, there's not much to know about how the system handles streaming videos at 4K. The main pointer here is to be sure that your TV is notifying you when HDR content is occurring, so you can adjust what you need to depending on what you're watching. With Netflix, when in doubt, it's a safe bet that all of their proprietary content is UHD. And if you're looking to watch UHD Blu-rays, you'll simply need to use the Blu-ray player app for your 4K movies. No special app or setting is required for viewing that content in UHD, thankfully. So that about does it for our big breakdown of things you'll need to know if you're jumping into the Xbox One X and 4K gaming for the first time. How many of you are planning on grabbing the system on Tuesday? Are any of you upgrading your TVs to do it? Let us know in the comments. For future breakdowns on all the latest releases, remember to like this video and subscribe to The Know.